What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with a course breakdown for this week's ZOZO Championship, heading over to Japan. Narashino Country Club, one of the more pristine courses you're going to see on tour all year, and that's really the biggest compliment that I can give a course. Not a piece of grass that is out of place around this venue, but most specifically going to cover everything you need to know about this track, this country club, which again is so pristine. We'll go through some comp courses, my key metrics for analysis this week that I'll be using to identify my top plays, both for the Draftkings and outright betting perspective. And we'll go hole by hole on the scorecard to give you an idea of some of the holes facing these players. Plenty of long par 4s on the docket, a few shorter par 3s, and like hole 18 where we saw Hideki Matsuyama make eagle to win there. A lot of exciting holes down the stretch. So a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. Alrighty, Shiba, Japan, that's the home for Accordia Golf Narashino Country Club, which is the official name for this track. It's a little bit of a longer name, so I'm just going to call it Narashino Country Club, but you get the idea there. And this is truly a unique track. So when you're in Japan, if you're not already familiar, you have a 2-green setup. Over there, they have a Zorja/Bermuda grass that they use on plenty of the tracks around Japan, and then a bent grass in the winter months. So they upkeep 2 greens pretty much 365 days a year, just so that when you have the winter conditions that the bent grass greens are a little bit more pristine. And then in the heat of summer, which was 2 to 3 months ago, those Bermuda Zoysia greens were the ones that were a little bit better maintained, that were a little bit more conducive for perfect conditions. So that's what you see on a lot of courses in Japan. But now that we're in that in-between period where it's not really summer, it's not really winter, both greens are going to be in perfect condition. So in fact, in 2019, you had a par 3, actually it was a par 4 in 2019, where they used both green complexes. They wanted to add that wrinkle, give you a little bit of flavor of that Japanese golf that you get this time of year. And back in 2021, they had a par 3 where they used both green complexes as well. So I would expect that trend to continue. Maybe it's that par 4 from 2019. Maybe it's the same par 3 that we saw last year being used in both scenarios there. But in general, that's a little creative twist that you have in all of these Japanese golf courses and around Narashino that is also the same sort of thing. It's a very American course. That's what I'll say about Narashino, is that even though it's over there in Japan, from the playability standpoint, it's pretty much everything you'd expect over here stateside. It's 7,079 yards, so it's not that long when it comes to the scorecard yardage. It's a par 70 with 5 par 3s and 3 par 5s. So that's a little bit different, right? Typically, we see something like 2 par 5s and something like 4 par 3s. So the average distance here is actually a little bit longer than the scorecard would indicate. So rather than right around 7,100 yards, if you were to make an effective yardage, that sort of metric, it'd be closer to like 7,250 yards. And on top of that, plenty of elevation changes to worry about. Some of the longer holes are strategically played downhill, whereas some of the shorter holes that look on the scorecard to be a lot more scoreable than some of the rest oftentimes play 10 to 15 yards uphill, adding that element of difficulty. So it's a well-designed track. It reminds me a lot of what we saw for the Tokyo Olympics with Kasamugaseki Country Club, which was just outside of Tokyo. That was another Parkland-style setup, which is also what you see here. So the parallels I was making between this course and then American setups is a lot from the visual standpoint. There's plenty of water in play. Every single blade of grass is as perfect as you would expect. The greens actually run a little bit more true over here in Japan. I would say that their agronomy people are just a little bit better than what we have over here in America. Maybe they have a little bit more pride in what they're doing. That's definitely reflected with the greens. And in terms of difficulty, you have small undulating greens, rough, that's Bermuda, it's 2 to 3 inches long. And I said the golf course is going to play a little bit longer than its scorecard yardage. It's got the length there too. It's got everything that we'd expect. So when we get into the key stats later, start to talk about some of my top golfers, it's not going to be a surprise that a lot of them are the ball striking sort of players. I mean, Hideki won last time out. In 2019, by the way, Tiger Woods won his last PGA Tour event there, the regular PGA Tour event at Narashino Country Club. So 2 of the best ball strikers, specifically the best iron players that we've ever seen for our game, are the guys that were at the top of the leaderboard. If you take a look at 2019, a few other ball striking specialists were up there in the top 5, top 10. And last year, a lot of the guys in contention were also those elite level ball strikers. So definitely, we'll get to the key stats a little bit later. We'll be able to hunker down on that. But it's about as American of a golf course as you're going to get over here in Asia. Let's take a look at some of the specifics. So par 70, I mentioned that there's 5 par 3s and there's 3 par 5s, which makes it a little bit deceptively longer. This was designed by Kinya Fujita, who actually was a classical designed architect over here in America, was designing a lot of courses in the USA before moving back over there to Asia, and has really moved that American style over from the Americas and taken it to Japan. So that's a lot of the reason why it looks so much like a golf course over here in America. I think of courses like a TPC River Highlands, with some of the water in play, also the Parkland style setup. I also think of a Firestone Country Club. Both of those are going to be comp courses that we're using. Just if you took a golf course from Ohio, maybe down there in North Carolina or something, and transplanted it over there into Japan, that's pretty much what we have here. There are bent grass greens, so the ones that they're using for a majority of the greens here are going to be the quote-unquote winter greens, which are bent grass over here in Japan. You will have a few holes, though, maybe one, maybe two, who knows what they end up doing this time around, though, where they use the Bermuda/Zoysia greens. So when we get into the key stats at the end, I am going to be focusing on bent grass numbers, but keep in mind you might see a little bit of a wrinkle there. The fairways are Zoysia, so it's extremely easy to apply spin on Zoysia fairways. They tend to be some of the best manicured fairways too. You've seen it at TPC Southwind. Actually, over the last few weeks, a few golf courses have started to introduce Zoysia into their tracks, which is a trend that you'll see around the world for probably the next few years. It's a little bit more pricey to go out there and maintain a Zoysia grass, but it's also a little bit more resilient to divots, so it's a lot easier to maintain long term. So even though the investment up front might be a little bit higher than what we have with a Bermuda grass fairway, Zoysia is a better long-term investment. So you're going to see a lot of courses start to rip up their fairways, move to this Zoysia grass, and of course over here in Japan, who I said, they're the best agronomists in all of the world. They're well ahead of that trend. All right, no shots gained metrics, so we don't have a lot of the percentages I typically bring on these course breakdowns, and also no pro visualizer overhead look. So we're really on our own here, but let's look at the scorecard, get an idea for some of the holes and shots that are going to be facing these guys. So holes 1 to 2 are extremely short, 400-yard par 4, 363-yard par 4. Both of them are going to be wedge at the very most into the green, if not something like a flip wedge into hole number 2 for some of the longer players. Hole 3 is 180-yard par 3, pretty standard, right? Something like a mid to shorter iron for a lot of these players. Hole 4 is 505 yards, though, and that's a par 4. That's going to be, and this is pretty much a guarantee there, one of the most difficult holes the entire weekend. So this is where you start to see the ball striking aspect really show up. With the wedge, you saw it last week with that birdie fest. Anyone can go out there and throw darts, but when it's a 500-yard par 4, that's where you start to see a lot of the separation in the field, where the longer players, those ball striking specialists that show up in major championships, are going to start to gain half a stroke to a stroke to the field pretty much on every single hole there. That's where Tiger Woods and Hideki Matsuyama made their hay. So hole 4 is a great example of where that separation is going to happen. 191-yard par 3. Also relatively difficult shot, so those ball striking iron type of specialists are going to have a huge advantage. Hole 6 is your first par 5. It's 587 yards, so it's on the medium end of the spectrum. It's not super lengthy. It's also reachable in 2 by pretty much everybody, as long as you get it into the fairway. Hole 7 is 167 yards, so a short par 3. Hole 8, 395. Hole 9, a little bit more difficult than hole 8, at 486. So you can see there's a 500-yard par 4 on the front 9, a 486-yard par 4. Both of those are going to be your difficult holes. You have that one par 5, which is reachable, and then the par 3s, though they aren't a cakewalk, they're going to be some of your better birdie opportunities. So, you could see somebody go out there, make 4 or 5 birdies on their front 9, but also mix in 2 to 3 bogeys on those difficult holes like the long par 3s and the nearly 500-yard par 4s. On the back 9, you have a lot of water in play. Also, a lot of difficult holes too, so only 2 more par 3s, a lot more par 4s on the docket. Hole 10 is 376, so whether you're going to see everyone start on hole 1, so it's not like a tour event where you might have guys starting on 1 and hole number 10. But hole 10, starting your back 9 isn't all that difficult, but holes 11 and 12 are going to get you. You have a 486-yard par 4 once again, and then a 490-yard par 4 right behind it. So both of those are going to be longer irons into those greens, and if you're missing the fairway, you're going to be in a whole heap of trouble. And that's something I want to kind of point out about this golf course is we do have that Bermuda grass rough. It's about 2 to 3 inches long, and anytime you're missing the fairway on these long par 4s, a lot of times you're laying up something like 40, 50 yards short of the green. And if you're going and taking on that green, sometimes they're going to be blocked out by the trees. I mentioned it has a parkland style setup, or you might end up just not getting perfect contact out of that Bermuda grass rough. So as much as it is about your iron play on some of these, medium to longer par fours, it's also a lot about your off the tee play. So when we get to the key stats, you're going to see that reflected. Hole 13 is 141 yards, so that's a birdie opportunity. Should be a wedge for most players. Hole 14 is over 600 yards, so it's not going to be reachable by most of the field. But if you hit a perfect tee shot, you might be able to get close to the green in two, but you're not going to see many eagle looks. Hole 15 is 425, pretty average par four. In fact, one of the only 400 to 450 yard par fours on the entire golf course. A lot of them are 400 yards or a little bit less, maybe, like 405, 410 yards, or on the higher end of the spectrum, 475 yards plus. So you're not going to have a lot of these in-between par fours. Hole 15 is an exception there. Hole 16 is your last par 3, 183 yards. 17 is one of the most difficult holes on the property. Really hard tee shot there, 491 yards. So another, try to get out of there with a par and move on. And 18, the hole that Hideki ended up eagling to win by 5 shots, is only 562. So that's reachable by every player in the field. Even if you miss the fairway, as long as you're not blocked out by trees, you can probably take a go at it. And there is water in play, a lot of fairway bunkers in play on this back 9. So that's why I mentioned off the tee play being so important, is there's a lot of risk reward to this golf course where you can take on shots as long as you're not blocked out of the, by trees and whatnot, but you're also bringing in water hazards, sand bunkers that are extremely difficult to get up and down from, where you can short side yourself. It's a strategic track that really, really rewards your ball striking ability. Now that we've seen the scorecard, some of the holes in play here, let's talk about my key stats for analysis. So at number 1, we've got shots gained approach, which shouldn't surprise anybody with winners like Tiger Woods and Hideki Matsuyama lining up here in the first 2 iterations. Also because it's such, I don't want to say an iron-heavy golf course, but you have 5 par 3s, a lot of longer par 4s, and even the shorter par 4s, you're still going to have a wedge in hand, right? So you either want somebody, ideally, that's great in all of those categories, or just more specifically, or I guess more commonly here, somebody that's really good with the wedges or really good with the long irons. If you can have an elite skill set, obviously if you can do both, that'd be great, but that's an extremely rare skill set. Guys like a Victor Hovland, Hideki Matsuyama might be some of the only players in this field that we can really group into both of those categories. But if you can be elite at one of the 2 skill sets there, I think that might be enough. So shots gained approach, always going to be important going into an event, but particularly at a ball striker heavy type of golf course. And number 2, we've got shots gained off the tee. So I alluded to that when we went through some of the back 9 holes there. Because you have these beefy par 4s, you've really got to get it in play. And ideally, if you want to score, get it out there 300, 320 yards. And on top of that, some of the par 5s, that 600 yard par 5, that 587 yard par 5, are only reachable by some of the elite tier distance players. So if you can go out there, hit it, like a Hideki Matsuyama, for example, which he's not an elite level distance guy, but he still carries it a solid 300 yards. That's what you're looking for. Now, you don't need Bryson distance. You don't need Brandon Matthews distance, Chris Goddard distance for that example. We're more looking for the guys that are just slightly above tour average when it comes to their distance. Now, can you win this or compete being a shorter player? For sure, but you're going to have a lot of trouble with those par 4s that are over 475 yards, and you're not going to be able to score as easily, or at least not going to have as much ego equity as some of the other longer tier players. So it's definitely, you're playing behind the 8 ball if you're not a strong off the tee player, which is why I have it at number 2 when it comes to my key stats, but it's not the end all be all like approach play where you have to be elite in one of those 2 categories. And at number 3, we've got shots gained putting on bent grass. And this is a ball striking heavy course, but putting is going to play a huge factor week in and week out on the tour. And anytime we have a grass type that we can hone in on, we want to try and take advantage of that. And this week it is bent grass. I mentioned before, they may add a wrinkle of a hole or 2 where they're using the caddy corner green. They will be a Bermuda / Zoysia over there on the alternate surface. But if you're talking about one round where they're playing one extra green, it's not going to make a huge impact, right? It's 1 out of the 72 holes that we have to worry about. If it's going to be bent grass for 71 of those 72 holes, that's what we're going to focus on. Outside of that, a few things I'm looking at are shots gained on par fours over 475 yards. Because we have a solid 4 to 5 of them on the property, something that I want to look at. Shots gained on par threes. Again, we have 5 par threes. That's important. We still have 3 par fives, so it's a little bit more important at this par 70 than most, as we have, an extra 50% par fives when it comes to this track. And a few other key stats. I'm looking at shots gained outside of the US, so people that are good international players. There's a little bit of an art form to being able to go outside of the US, a little bit outside of your comfort zone when it comes to some of these players. And you've heard it, especially at the Live Golf event last week. You heard a lot of the guys that are like, oh, I love this part of the world. Like an Ian Poulter, for example. And if you look at his track record in Asia, he's amazing. He finishes in the top 10, top 15 almost every single time. So I do think there's something to be had with that. So call it shots gained ZOZO, call it shots gained CJ Cup, whatever it has to be over there in that part of the world. Tokyo Olympics, players that played well at Gsluke Country Club, which is a comp course we're actually going to talk about here in a minute, are all things that I'm looking at. All right, and now for those comp courses that I was alluding to. So first off, Gsluke Country Club, right? Gonna hop right into it. That's the home of the Tokyo Olympics, another Japanese golf course with 2 green setup. They used actually a few of them in the 2 green format there, so it's something they did at the Olympics. You're also going to see it this week at Narashino. On top of that, it's that Parkland style setup, more of an American golf course than anything. And I know it was the Tokyo Olympics, but it looked more like Firestone Country Club than anything. So we're going to talk about Firestone a little bit later. Obviously, Gsluke was another one of those ball striking first type of golf courses where you had a lot of those elite level iron players at the top of the leaderboard. So not a surprise for me that I'm going to use that as a comp, but only a 1 tournament sample size. And honestly, I believe there's only like 4 or 5 guys in the field that we can really use as a true comp there without shots gained metrics. But what's useful here is to look at the types of players that had success at Gsluke, right? Look at some of the skill sets, because it wasn't all ball strikers. You had a few putting specialists have ideal weeks. I mean, Rory Sabatini is not a ball striking phenom by any means, but he's a solid wedge player, right? Somebody who can get hot on the bent grass surface. Those sort of trends are what I'm trying to look at, right? So the golf course is almost identical. That box is checked emphatically. The only issue is the sample size. On top of that, we got TPC River Highlands, so the home of the Travelers Championship. Bent grass greens, you love to see that, but from the ball striking perspective, a lot of comps. It's that Parkland setup. You have a few holes with water in play, which brings a little bit of variance in, so that's really where I like a lot of the crossover. The greens, relatively large at both golf courses. Now, you don't have 2 green setups around the Travelers Championship, obviously, but we have a massive sample size. So if I can try and find a ball striking comp to go off of that we have a sample size year in and year out, it's going to be TPC River Highlands. So that's what makes this comp especially useful, is that we're going to have the largest sample size by far of any of these 3 courses, and then we have the shots gained metrics to back it up. And lastly, the last comp we're going with is a little bit off board here. A course that we haven't seen for quite some time is Firestone Country Club, and the reason for it is it's pretty much the American version of this golf course, where I think a lot of the inspiration for it came from. And when we played Gsluke, Firestone was also a comp there, because again, it's kind of that traditional American style where it's all about the ball striking, right? Long par fours, the par threes are all about hitting really precise shots. A lot of undulation on the par threes around Firestone. You see that same sort of feel and same sort of style around Narashino. So that's something that we're looking at. Unfortunately, kind of like with Gsluke, not a massive sample size to work with. We've had a few PGA championships at Firestone. They've played the WGC Bridgestone there at least 10, 15 times over the last 20 to 30 years. So there is a sample size. We can learn from some of those leaderboards. But again, shots gained metrics aren't a thing for those events. And it's not like it's something that we're seeing year in and year out on the PGA Tour. But with that being said, there's a lot of trends that we can learn from it, right? So looking at some of the leaderboards over the years will give us a good idea of what to look at. And when we analyze specifically the Firestone leaderboards, it's all about approach playing off the tee play. It's one of the most ball striking skewed golf tournaments that we've ever had on the history of the PGA Tour. So when we keep that in mind, when looking at the winners like Tiger Woods and Hideki Matsuyama, you can see why I have so much confidence in this as a comp, right? Because the best ball strikers of all time have been the ones that have won over the 2-year sample size. And again, it's only a 2-year sample size to this point, but even going into 2019, we had courses like Firestone being talked up as comps, something that I've been on for quite some time at this point. And to this point, no evidence to prove otherwise to say that we're not on the right track there. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Unfortunately, didn't have the Pro Visualizer breakdown. I guess for Japanese golf courses, isn't something that they're covering. Also, no shots gain metrics or data golf data to go off of, so a little bit of a bare bones setup here, but still wanted to bring you an idea of what to expect this week. But go ahead, smash that like button, right? If this helped you out, you feel like you're a little bit more prepared for your research process, go ahead and show us some love on the channel, but also go ahead and comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be this week. I personally think it's going to play on the more difficult side. Anytime we're going into an event, I think people like to imagine that it's going to play easy. You have fireworks. So it might get closer to 20 under par, but I'm going to take 14 under. I'm going to stray in the slightly harder direction. Maybe it plays slightly firmer and faster this year. It's way too early to tell those sort of things, but I'm going to take 14 under par. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts down below and what you're thinking in terms of the winning score. But thank you guys for stopping by as per usual, showing all the support that you guys do here. I appreciate it so much. We're going to have even more content dropping throughout the week. I'm going to be premiering a little bit of a lineup review going on the channel. So if you've been playing PGA DFS, I'm going to go through my lineups from last week, what we can learn that went well, things that obviously didn't go so well last week because we didn't win the GPP, right? That's the ultimate goal there. So we'll talk why, the reasons why that didn't happen, and give you an idea of some of the process behind PGA DFS. So we'll have that coming out. Core picks as per usual, value picks, all that sort of fun stuff. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel already, I would highly recommend you do so you don't miss any of that content in the future. But again, best of luck with any outright bets, any DFS lineups that you guys are entering for the ZOZO Championship, and let's get this cash.